Let me start by saying I appreciate your attention, even if my voice is like this. My voice gets irritated when I talk, so I am disenfranchised because I'm a preacher, I'm a teacher, I'm a counselor. And that makes me miserable when I'm teaching. I have to rest my voice time and time again. Second, I have to commend you for being attentive. You know that in public speaking, there is such a thing as audience sympathy. When the audience looks attentive, then speakers are encouraged to go on talking. Except politicians, they talk every time even if no one listens. But we are not in politics. Let me revise the 3 readings. Number 1 reading talks about hospitality. In a culture of nomadic tribes, you are almost forced by your culture to need hospitality. You need to be welcome anywhere because you're NPA, no permanent address. And so in the time of the ancient Israelites, which are not the same as the state of Israel, don't confuse the biblical Israelites with the state of Israel. They needed people to be hospitable. And indeed, the first reading talks about hospitality to aliens. Nomads without permanent addresses. They need hospitality. And the greatest virtue that is impressed upon the Jews of old was to give hospitality to aliens, to orphans, to widows, and those who are resident aliens. In other words, hospitality to the unconnected and the unprotected. Why? If you're an alien, you don't belong to a tribe. The leader of the tribe is your protector. If you are a visitor in another person's tribe, you don't have a protector, you're vulnerable. Therefore, when the Lord exhorts the Israelites to be hospitable and to give welcome to aliens, it has to do with the utmost act of charity that any nomadic person can ever hope to do. In the second reading, St. Paul is profusely thanking the Thessalonians because they had forsaken false gods and chosen the one true God. So I have to thank you for coming to Mass every Sunday. You're not one of those who attend Mass in iPads. Wala ng pandemya pero sa iPad pa rin nagsisimba o sa gadget. And that for me is one of the very, very poor lessons we learned from the pandemic. The third, the gospel, is another trap, so I call this Patibong Part 2. Last week, the Patibong, the trap, had to do with the coin. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to the Romans? And the Lord did a trick on the questioner, on these lawyers, on these people who were learned, and they were using their learning to trap a rabbi, a teacher. And show me the coin, he said, and out they came with the coin. And therefore they exposed themselves because they were guilty of idolatry. They brought the coin with the image of Herod, the emperor, Caesar, the Tsar, the Kaiser, on the coin, and that was the temple area. That was a no-no for a Jew. So sino na sasakdal? Yung nagsakdal, yung nagtanong ng patibong. Today, the context is Patibong Part 2. What is the greatest commandment? It is a stupid question, first, because every Jew knows it. It's the morning prayer of every practicing Jew. Shema, O Israel. Listen, O Israel. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. It was a non-question. It is a question designed not to ferret out truth, but to catch somebody off guard. And therefore, they were doing exactly what they were busy doing, looking at the 613 precepts of the Torah, of the Old Law. 248 of them were positive, 365 were negative. And what were they doing? Isinasalansan nila yung 613 batas. At laging pinag-uusapan, pinagtatalunan. Alin dito ang pinakamahalaga? It was a useless pastime. When you talk about obeying the law, it doesn't matter which one goes first and who goes second. It was a well laid out trap, and the Lord came out the winner. It was buy one, take one. And let me explain that later. Last week, we heard the Patibong Part 1, the tax coin. Today, we hear Patibong Part 2. And Jesus was asked for one and only one question. Which is the greatest of the commandments? The Lord didn't fall for the trap. To that one question, He gave two answers. It was buy one, take one. And so He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as you love yourself. He answered two, not one. Kambal na hindi pwede paghiwalayin. When you ask the right questions, when you ask the wrong question, God, the Lord, Jesus Christ, took it upon Himself to correct and to teach and to establish the one true answer. You have to take both. It is a both and. It is not either or. It is both and. Love and love. Kambal na hindi pwede paghiwalayin. So what is our take home for today? 30th Sunday of the year. Number 1, sanay tayo mag-compartmentalize ng lahat ng bagay sa mundo. We compartmentalize everything. We put politics on the one side and religion on the other. And so 61% of homeowners of Barangay Don Bosco go to Boracay during Elections Day, since it is a long weekend, or go to Tagaytay, or go to Taytay, everywhere there is a resort, or go to Baguio. Religion has become unconnected with politics. Compartmentalization spells indifference. Bala kayo dyan. Wapakilos ako sa politika. But then, after the election, we complain about the tricycles. We complain about the parking. We complain about cars stopping. Sa Doña Soledad, pagka nag-hazard ka, you have the right to stop anywhere. And so, pagka naka-hazard, nakabara, yan ang ibig sabihin sa mga kanto. And indifference, we compartmentalize everything. And when we compare religion and politics, then we can say safely while we are in Boracay, wala akong pakialam dyan. This does not concern me. Kaya, when we compartmentalize business from ethics, kaya araw ng linggo, Santito, Lunes hanggang Sabado, Maldito. Business is business. When we compartmentalize our lives, then business does not fall within the ambit of the moral law. Business is business, ibang usapan yan. And therefore, you can do what you want. In the case of the climate situation, the Pope has always been talking about climate justice. When we hear the word justice, we think only in terms of interpersonal justice. But the Church has been developing, since Benedict XVI, two other aspects of justice that are just as important as interpersonal justice. We talk now about intergenerational justice, the justice that we owe to generations that will still be born 100 years from now, but we use the earth like there is no tomorrow. The whole world now is using the resources of 1.5 planets. We are using the resources of 1.5 Earth planets, but we have only one Earth, and we are not sure whether there is life in Venus and in Mars and on the moon. But the fact is we use 1.5 planets in terms of resources. Pero wapakils pa rin tayo. Climate justice concerns you and me. Why? Because we contribute less than 0.1% of the greenhouse gases as a whole nation. And yet we are number 5 in the top 10 countries who stand to be suffering the most because of climate change. Some group of scientists recently came up with a study. Supposing the Philippines were out of the map and we disappeared from the Pacific Ocean, and they, according to their studies, then Vietnam will suffer terribly with all the typhoons, much worse than we are suffering them now. China will be battered black and blue with climate-related problems, much worse than we are facing now. The Philippines is like Ukraine. Ukraine defends the whole of Europe from the narrative of the empire of Putin. The Philippines defends Vietnam, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the mainland China from all the bad effects of climate change. We are paying a very high price. A very high price. More than we can ever imagine. And yet, wapakels ang mga Pilipino. Tuloy ang ligaya. Number 3, we have neatly divided life into hermetically sealed parts that do not relate to each other. I have mentioned them: politics, religion, business, and ethics. If 61% of homeowners do not vote, where do the complaints come from? Last thing I heard, they came from the homeowners, not from the developing areas. You know, wapakils pa rin ang Pilipino. Yung mga pogo na nagre-rent ng inyong mga condos, ng inyong mga apartments, they pay you handsome sums. They are proven to be carrying arms. In other words, if conflict arises, there is no need for China to invade us. They're right here in Multinational, in Alabang, here in Barangay Don Bosco, everywhere. They're all around us. The Chinese could not have built the artificial islands in what they claim to be according to their 9-dash line, which will become 10-dash line, once they are able to establish their sovereignty over the whole of South China Sea, which is our West Philippine Sea. They could not have built the Chinese artificial islands without the disloyalty of governors and mayors who flattened mountains in Zambales and are still flattening mountains in Surigao. The land, the soil rather, the stones, the rocks that were built to build those, used to build those islands came from the Philippines. The generosity, misguided generosity, corrupt politics of the Filipino politicians. That's why, as a teacher of moral theology, I've always been saying for the longest time, Philippine elections are a structure of sin. Last week, our response after the first reading was, "Our help shall come from the Lord." I wanted to make a little joke. It should be changed in the Philippines. Our help comes from elections. Our help comes from elections. After elections, there is no more help. So, what do we take home? I'm not here to make you angry. I'm here to give you the good news. But like as is my wont, my capacity to give the good news is to contextualize it in the reality. It is seeing, judging, acting. Seeing the reality for what it is, not for what we want to see, but reality as it is. And therefore the big bottom line here is the big question. And it is no longer what is the greatest commandment. Of the 613 precepts of the law, the big question for you and me especially, is this: what is the greatest value that you consider your greatest value in life? Yan ang bottom line. What are the essentials in your life? If the essentials have to do with making a fast buck by selling your island to Chinese poachers and rendering your service as policemen to guard the pogos because you're earning 10 times more than the Philippine government can ever pay you, that is your biggest value. And that value is not loyal, that value is not authentic, that value is not Christian. The biggest value, what is the greatest commandment? It has to do with what do we prize the most in our lives. And that is for you and me to answer in the quiet reflection deep within our heart. And I am praying hard that, like St. Paul, who thanked the Thessalonians for doing away with false gods, I pray that we might be delivered from false narratives, from fake news, from the narrative of greed, the narrative of the empire, and the narrative of falsity and sin. Need I say more?